Hi there, my name is Sonya PauKune and I am a professor of art and design here at Ames Community College, and my main area of concentration is in ceramics. I wanted to create a series of DVDs or videos to help students with the basic foundation structure of throwing and of trimming. So this is our trimming video on the cylinder. So a cylinder is a basic shape, and if you look at the shape of the cylinder, you can imagine all different varieties of forms it could take, from a simple mug to a beautiful elegant vase to a wine decanter, or even a spaghetti jar could be made out of a cylinder shape. So today what I'd like to do is I'm going to show you the basic techniques of how to trim a cylinder. I've got a couple examples over here, and I'll start with the first one. So as I'm throwing a cylinder form, my main idea is to have basically a flat bottom and then even thickness as it goes up the walls. This one is a little bit thick on the structure. Our normal goal is about 1/4 of an inch. So this is what the form might look like after you get it off the potter's wheel when you throw the cylinder. And then we have a couple examples of what we're looking for after we get done trimming. So again, one of the major important areas of wheel throwing and trimming is that the evenness of the wall thickness stays consistent from top to bottom. So that's ultimately what we're doing. So if you look here, we're about 1/4 of an inch, and then it's just a little bit larger than 1/4 of an inch, but almost exactly 1/4 of an inch, and the bottom is trimmed out. I have another example of one where they actually didn't get it quite as thin, so I've drawn some lines on the surface of the clay to show you maybe some extra trimming that they could have done to get a nice even wall thickness. So if we look at the top of this one, it's a little bit thin, and then as I go down here at the bottom, it got a little bit thicker on the trimming. So for that student, they could have trimmed a little bit more off, so I've drawn some guidelines to show you what your ultimate goal is for the trimming of the walls. So let's get started with one that I threw the other day. So here's a simple cylinder shape. It started with about 1 3/4 pounds, which is my favorite size of a mug. And what I was really shooting for is nice even wall thickness. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look into the inside of my piece, and I see that I have a nice flat bottom. If I have a round bottom cylinder, I'm going to have to trim it a little different, more like you're trimming a bowl. So I look and I see it's nice and flat. I can feel the walls, and they're pretty even as it goes up, and I can feel the thickness of my base. So the next thing I'm going to do after I get done assessing it visually is I want to place it on my wheel head, and my wheel head is designed with banding lines across the circumference of the wheel. So if you look, there's several lines that are etched into the metal. Those lines are my guideline on getting the top part of my piece centered. So I'm going to eyeball those right in the center of those lines. So I'm going to try to make it even. But what is centered here at the top and at the bottom are a little bit different just by the structure of throwing on the potter's wheel. So I can't just base my centering here. I need to look up here. So the first thing I'm going to do after I get done eyeballing it into center with the banding wheels is I'm going to take my needle tool and I'm going to get it into center by creating a line across the circumference of my cylinder until it gets nice and even. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get my wheel going relatively slow, about 1/2 to 3/4 speed. Full speed is really, really fast. I don't need to go that fast with my cylinder. So I want to make sure that I'm going about 3/4 speed. Our wheels are designed so if I lift up my foot directly off of the foot pedal without pressing my toe or heel down, it stays consistent at that speed. So while you're trimming, if you're finding yourself speeding up and slowing down with your foot, take your foot off the pedal so it can stay nice and consistent and even. I don't have that problem, so I'm going to keep my foot up on the wheel head. So my next technique is to actually draw a line on this surface to see whether it's in center. So I'm going to hold my needle tool with my right hand, because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you'll be doing everything the opposite. I'm going to slowly move into my cylinder, and as soon as my needle tool starts to draw a line, I don't want to push it any further. I'm holding it steady. So then when I stop, I can see I have a line, and the line ends right here. And then if I push this around, I can see that the rest of my line ends right about there. So I have a line that goes from here to there on my cylinder and no line that goes from here to here. What that tells me is that this part of the cylinder is closer to my tool and therefore not in center. So I'm going to take that little line and I'm going to gauge these two lines, the end and beginning of the line, and I'm going to line them up with my shoulders. And then I'm going to push ever so slightly away from that line. And I'm pushing it just a little tiny amount, not a huge amount. Then I want to hold it steady, and I'm going to erase that line. Then I'm going to start the process again. I've got my needle tool, slowly moving in towards the vessel. As soon as it makes the line, I don't move my needle tool any further. If I stop it, the line actually goes right to here. And then this part of the line goes all the way over to here. Okay, so now more of my cylinder is closer to the tool. So I'm going to line these back up, these little lines with my shoulder. Push ever so slightly, a little away, hold it down, erase my line. And I want to continue to do this until it's completely symmetrical. If I don't have it centered on my wheel head when I go to trim, I'll end up with one side thicker than the other. And that can cause a lot of problems, A, from caving in on that side of the wall, to B, causing it to crack because I'm drying unevenly. So I'm going to get my needle tool again. And now I'm drawing a line all the way around the piece so it's nice and centered. So this is the beginning level technique for centering your piece on the wheel to trim. The advanced technique is called tapping it into center, and I'm now going to switch, and I'm going to do the tapping into center technique using my left hand as my needle tool and my right hand to push the clay away. So I'm going to hold my finger, I'm going to get that off center, hold my finger up on the top in the center of the wheel head. I've got my left finger there, and if you look, every time the clay hits my thumb, that's when I want to tap it into center, because it's telling me the clay is closer to my thumb. So as soon as it hits, I'm just going to tap it very lightly on the bottom, and it's in center now. So you can see the advantage of being able to tap into center versus using the needle tool. It takes at least like maybe a quarter of the time as it would to do my needle tool. So let's try that again. So I'm going to knock it off center. So you can see it's off center when it's moving visually. So hit, hit, hit. So every time it hits my thumb, I'm going to tap it into center until it evenly glides around my thumb. Now we're centered. Okay, so the next technique is to actually attach your cylinder to the wheel head, and I need to do that with clay. And I'm going to use my nice plastic clay from the same bag of clay that I threw my original pieces in. If I'm using white clay and red clay, the red clay can leave a scar or a mark on the surface of your white clay. So you want to try to stick with the same colored clay. The clay is nice and plastic, so I can roll it into little coils, and I'm going to roll 3 coils. I like to put 3 wads of clay on the base of my piece. I don't like to go all the way around, because if you go all the way around, sometimes you can't get it off of the wheel head without scarring it. So I'm going to start by putting one of the wads around it, and I'm going to push the clay towards the cylinder and into the wheel head. So I don't want to smear it up into the clay like this, okay? I'm trying to avoid that. And I'm going to do a triad, so I'm going to do another 3rd coil here, towards the cylinder and into the wheel head. And then my last one we'll do right over here. Now after I get done doing that, I want to jiggle it, and I want to make sure that it's nice and secure. Because if it's not secure and I'm trimming it, it could go flying off the wheel head and probably get destroyed or seriously damaged. So now let's look at some of the tools that I'll be using to start trimming out the base and the sides of my piece. We have a pear-shaped trimming tool. This is really great for like large vases, and I also like to use it to flatten out the side. This is my favorite trimming tool. It's got a large kind of 3/4 inch flat surface on one side, and then a nice diameter of a cylinder or circle shape on the other. Really good to trim with. And then I also like to use this little guy, which is a miniature version of the other one, a smaller little loop and a smaller flat edge. And I'll use those. And then my last things that I generally like to use when I'm trimming are metal ribs. These are my favorite. So I can use this angled flat rib to create nice corners, flat edges, curved areas. I can use this serrated metal rib to get a nice textured surface on my forms. I also can use plastic ribs. This is a little bit more flexible. Personally, I like the metal rib better, but I could use plastic if I wanted to. And then there's also some other areas where you have nice square ribs, and this is also made from plastic, and it has a combination of a serration on the edge too, so it's multifunctional. All right, so let's get started with the trimming. So I'm going to start with my pear-shaped trimming tool, and I want to get off all the clay on this edge. If you look here on this diagram, or this half cylinder, you can see where it's thicker here. As it moves its way up, it gets thinner. So I want to take off this extra clay, and I want to make it parallel to my vessel. So I'm just going to hold this steady, straight up and down. And I want this to be nice and level. Okay, after I get done determining where the outside of my foot is going to be, which is basically keeping it in level with the sides of the form, I'm going to go in and determine my base. So I'm going to start by using the pointed edge of my trimming tool, so this little edge right here. I'm going to put it right here in the center, and then I'm going to move my way out to about 3 or 4 o'clock on the analog clock. And I'll keep doing that to where I have about 1/4 of an inch on the edge. Before I get too far, though, I want you to listen to this sound. So it kind of just sounds like a little thug, okay? And when I press on it, it's not flexing at all. It's really solid. This is the way I determine how thick it is on the bottom. So let's go again. We'll start at the center, move our way out to about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And right in there. Okay, so I've taken 2 more passes. I generally don't like to do more than 2 passes of trimming, that means going from the center to the edge, before I check the thickness of my base. A cylinder with a big hole in the bottom of it is not a functional object at all. It really can't be used, so you always want to make sure you don't trim through the bottom. If I had a bowl that I trimmed through the bottom of it, I could make it into a planter. I could use it for something else. So now as I'm starting to press, it's starting to flex a little. And see how much louder that is than it was the first time I hit it. Okay, so I'm getting there. I'm going to do one more flattening trim. Get that edge nice and flat. I was going to talk a little bit too about the discoloration of the clay. If you noticed as I'm trimming it, the clay is gray, and the clay that's not trimmed is more of a buff colored. Clay has a lot of mold in it. So this is actually the mold spores in the clay, and after they start to dry, it starts to dissipate and it'll turn into this buff color instead. So it's not 2 different kinds of clay. All righty, let's just check one more time. Do a little press. I think I can go another round, so we're going to go one more. All righty, that is good. Now I like to do a little compression from the center out, just to make sure that I don't have any lines or grooves into the clay. The grooves can actually lead to a crack, so I want to make sure that they're not there. All right, so now if we take a look at it, we can see that I've got a pretty thick base here. It's a little bit thicker than 1/4 of an inch because I'm going to trim some more away on it. I've got a nice deep foot rim, a little bit deeper than 1/4 of an inch, but about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to start addressing the sides here. I want to create a nice little lift on my piece. So if we look at this trimmed cylinder, we can see this little edge. That creates a visual lift. It actually makes a piece look lighter. And in clay terms, you kind of want the piece to look a little bit lighter and airier, but you still want it to be hardy enough to handle a nice cup of hot cocoa in here, or even if I dropped a spoon down into the bottom, you don't want it to break out of the bottom. So you want it to be nice and even thickness, and you want it to look lighter than what it actually is. So I'm going to start addressing that with my foot. And I'm going to make a pretty big foot. If you look here, this is an example of the larger foot using this tool, or when you look at this one, this is the smaller foot using that tool. So I get to decide what type of foot I want. It's my vessel. So I'm going to decide for this one a little bigger. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to hold this tool steady, and I'm just going to keep it in one spot to create a nice lift. Okay, so I've got it held steady. Nice little lift. Now I'm going to switch to my metal rib, my flat metal rib, and this one actually, you guys, is my favorite rib. Of all ribs, if you only had one to live with, this would be the one you want. So I'm going to come in here and I really want to define that line where I've created the lift. So I'm going to hold the flat edge right up into that little area to give it a little bit more personality, and it also gives me a nice area for glazing. When I stop the wheel, you'll be able to see it a little bit more. So if you look here, you can see that very faint line. The mold is kind of preventing us from seeing it as well, but there's a line between this little concaved area and this flat area. And that's what I'm looking for. I'll try to make it a little bit more defined because the mold is making it hard to see. There we go. Now you can see it. That's a little bit better. So now you can see that line. The very last thing I want to do is I want to sweep across this, make it nice and flat, and then do a glaze catch. So if we look at this cylinder right here, actually we'll look at this one because he's a little bit larger. We've got our nice indentation that's giving us that visual elevation and that lightness. And then right here we've got this 45-degree angle right on the edge of that base. That is our glaze catch. That can help prevent the glaze from running on the shelf. Can't perform miracles if there's too much glaze, but it helps it quite a bit. And if you look at the two versions, both of them have that little 45-degree angle right off of the edge of that indentation. So that's what I'm going to do here. So I'll go back to my flat tool. And the first thing I want to do is make sure that this is nice and even. So I'm going to start on the inside at about 2 o'clock. I'm going to wrap that tool around, nice and steady and even, until I get to the outside edge. I'm going to clean all this up. And now I'm going to do my 45-degree angle glaze catch right off the corner here. Hold it at a 45-degree angle. Get it nice and defined. And then I'm going to rub my fingers all around the surface to make sure I don't have any sharp edges or any seams. And then the very last thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I put my initials, or if I have a fancy signature, whatever it is, on the base of your piece. Here at Ames, we generally have about 50 or more ceramic students. So if you don't put your name on the bottom, it's really hard for us to determine whose it is. But also just in the world of art, own your work, own your beauty. Go ahead and write your initials onto the bottom of it. Be proud of it. And then you'll know you always have it and when you made it. Let's go ahead and take that off and we'll take a little look. So you can see where I've got my nice thick foot rim. I've got this beautiful little elegant lift off the base of it. It's pretty even. I think I may have left a little bit too much clay here along the side. When we cut it in half, we'll get to see. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it in half. Alrighty. So let's take a look at this little half. Ooh. Okay, couple things. I got it a little thin on the bottom, all right? At the beginning of each semester, I actually make the students throw and cut cylinders in half. And the reason why is because sometimes we don't know exactly what's going on until we dissect it and see what's going on. So I could leave a little thickness here for my next cylinder, and I could trim off just a little bit, not much, a little bit more off these edges here for a perfect cylinder, which as a human being, I don't have to make everything perfect, but my goal is to try to make it as perfect as possible. So the other videos, we have the wheel throwing cylinder, the wheel throwing bowl, the trimming of the bowl, and the trimming of the cylinder. They're all available for you to use for instruction or tutoring, and I hope you really enjoy your time in the wheel throwing area of Ames, and good throwing and good trimming. Thanks a lot.